Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because Jessica's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim light filtering through her car's windshield. The clock on the dashboard read 11:43 p.m. She blinked, trying to remember how she'd gotten here. The last thing she recalled was studying for her psychology midterm in her dorm room. "Focus, Jess," she muttered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The road ahead twisted like a serpent, cutting through the dense Colorado forest. Tall pines loomed on either side, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the moonlight. Jessica's heart raced as she navigated the sharp turns, her palms growing sweaty against the leather of the steering wheel. A sign flashed by. "Mountain pass ahead, drive carefully." Jessica swallowed hard. Something about this felt familiar, yet terrifyingly wrong. She glanced at her phone in the cup holder, but the screen remained black. No signal. "Okay, just take it slow," she coached herself, easing her foot off the accelerator. The car responded, slowing from 50 to 40 mph. As she rounded another bend, her headlights illuminated a deer standing in the middle of the road. Jessica gasped, instinctively jerking the wheel to the right. "No, no, no!" she cried out as the tires lost traction. The world spun around her, trees and stars blurring into a dizzying whirl. The screeching of tires filled her ears, drowning out her own screams. Jessica's stomach lurched with dread as she felt the car tilt, realizing too late that she'd swerved too close to the edge of the cliff. Time seemed to slow as the car teetered on the precipice. For a split second, Jessica caught a glimpse of the vast darkness below, a yawning abyss ready to swallow her whole. Then, with a sickening lurch, the car plummeted over the edge. "Help!" Jessica screamed, her voice raw with terror. "Somebody help me!" But there was no one to hear her cries. The car tumbled down the rocky slope, each impact sending shockwaves of pain through Jessica's body. Glass shattered, metal crumpled, and Jessica felt herself being tossed around like a rag doll despite her seatbelt. In those eternal seconds of freefall, Jessica's mind raced. Images flashed before her eyes, her parents' smiling faces, her little brother's laugh, the proud moment she got her acceptance letter to college. "I don't want to die," she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. The car slammed into the ground with a thunderous crash. Jessica's head snapped forward, then back, her vision exploding with stars. The taste of copper filled her mouth as she bit her tongue. She could feel warm blood trickling down her face from a gash on her forehead. Dazed and in shock, Jessica blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The car had landed on its roof, and she hung upside down, suspended by her seatbelt. Every breath sent daggers of pain through her chest, probably broken ribs, she thought distantly, remembering her first aid training. "Hello?" she called out weakly. "Is anyone there? Please. I need help." Only the creaking of settling metal answered her. Jessica tried to move to unbuckle her seatbelt, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. A wave of nausea washed over her as the metallic scent of blood mixed with leaking gasoline. Gasoline. The realization hit her like a second impact. She needed to get out of the car, now. "Come on, Jess," she urged herself, fighting against the pain and disorientation. "You have to move." With trembling fingers, she managed to press the seatbelt release. She crashed onto the roof of the car, crying out as fresh pain blossomed across her body. Gritting her teeth, Jessica began to drag herself towards the shattered driver's side window. Each movement was agony, glass and twisted metal cutting into her palms and knees. She could feel warm blood soaking through her jeans. Just as she reached the window, a new sound reached her ears. A low, ominous crackling. Jessica turned her head and her blood ran cold. Flames had erupted from the engine compartment, hungrily licking their way towards her. "No, please no," she sobbed, redoubling her efforts to escape. The heat grew intense, and smoke began to fill the car. Jessica coughed violently, her lungs burning as she struggled to breathe. The flames drew closer, their orange glow casting twisted shadows in the wreckage. With one final, desperate surge of strength, Jessica pulled herself through the window. Shards of glass tore at her skin, but she barely noticed, so focused was she on escape. She dragged herself a few feet from the car before collapsing, her body finally giving in to the trauma it had endured. Rolling onto her back, Jessica stared up at the star-filled sky. The crackling of the fire grew louder, and she could feel its heat on her skin. She wanted to move further away, but her body refused to respond. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Dad. I love you." The fire roared, consuming the car. Jessica closed her eyes, waiting for the end. But instead of more pain, she felt a sudden, jarring shift. Her eyes snapped open, and she found herself gasping for air, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Her dorm room came into focus. The gentle hum of her roommate's fan, the soft glow of the string lights they'd hung together, the familiar scent of her lavender air freshener. Jessica's hands flew to her body, expecting to find blood and broken bones. But there was nothing. "It was just a dream," she panted, her heart still racing. Just a dream. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Jessica realized this was unlike any dream she'd ever had. The pain had felt real. The fear had been real. She could still taste blood in her mouth, still smell the acrid scent of smoke. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Jess?" Her roommate's voice came through, thick with sleep. "Are you okay? I heard screaming." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but instead of words, a choked sob escaped her lips. The door creaked open, and her roommate, Emma, poked her head in. "Oh my God, Jess," Emma gasped, rushing to her side. "What happened? You're shaking like a leaf." Jessica tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she collapsed into Emma's arms, violent sobs racking her body. "Shh, it's okay," Emma soothed, stroking Jessica's hair. "It was just a bad dream. You're safe now." But as Jessica clung to her friend, the vivid memories of the crash replaying in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a nightmare. Something had changed tonight, and deep in her gut she knew with chilling certainty that her ordeal was far from over. "It felt so real," she finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Emma, it felt so real." Emma pulled back, her brow furrowed with concern. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jessica shook her head, then winced as a phantom pain shot through her neck. Not right now. I just need a minute." "Okay," Emma said softly. "How about I make us some tea? That always helps me after a nightmare." Jessica nodded gratefully, and Emma squeezed her hand before leaving the room. Left alone, Jessica hugged her knees to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. She glanced at her phone, 3:17 a.m. In a few hours, she'd have to get up for class, face the world as if nothing had happened. But how could she, when every time she closed her eyes, she saw that winding mountain road, felt the sickening lurch as her car went over the edge? As the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Jessica made a silent vow to herself. She would figure out what this dream meant, why it had felt so viscerally real, and she would do whatever it took to make sure she never had to experience that terror again. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would push her to the very limits of her sanity, blurring the lines between dream and reality in ways she could never have imagined. The shrill beeping of Jessica's alarm cut through the morning silence, jolting her awake. For a blissful moment, she forgot about the nightmare that had plagued her just hours ago. Then, like a tidal wave, the memories crashed over her. Jessica groaned, rubbing her eyes. The clock read 7:30 a.m. She'd managed to get a few hours of fitful sleep after Emma had comforted her, but she felt far from rested. "Come on, Jess," she muttered to herself. "It was just a dream. Get it together." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing as her feet touched the cold floor. Every muscle in her body ached, as if she'd actually been in that car crash. Jessica shook her head, trying to dispel the thought. In the bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face, avoiding her reflection in the mirror. She knew what she'd see. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, the haunted look of someone who'd stared death in the face. "Stop it," she hissed at herself. It wasn't real. Back in her room, Jessica got dressed on autopilot, her mind still replaying scenes from the nightmare. The twisting mountain road, the deer, the sickening freefall. A knock at her door made her jump. "Jess!" Emma's voice called out. "You up? I made coffee." Jessica took a deep breath, plastering what she hoped was a convincing smile on her face before opening the door. "Morning, Em," she said, her voice sounding strained even to her own ears. Emma's brow furrowed with concern. "How are you feeling? You look like you barely slept." Jessica shrugged, following Emma to their small kitchenette. "I'm fine. Just a rough night, that's all." Emma handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "Do you want to talk about it? That nightmare seemed pretty intense." For a moment, Jessica considered confiding in her friend. But how could she explain the visceral reality of the dream, the lingering certainty that it was more than just a product of her imagination? "It's okay," Jessica said, forcing a light tone. "Probably just stress from midterms coming up. This coffee will help." Emma didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "All right, but you know I'm here if you need to talk, right?" Jessica nodded, grateful for her friend's support even as she pushed her away. "Thanks, Em. I appreciate it." As they finished their coffee in companionable silence, Jessica's eyes fell on her car keys hanging by the door. Her stomach churned at the sight of them. "Hey, Em," she said, her voice small. "Would you mind if I caught a ride with you to campus today? I'm not feeling up to driving." Emma's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Jessica never asked for rides. She loved the independence her car gave her. "Of course," Emma said slowly. "Everything okay with your car?" Jessica nodded quickly. Yeah, just thought it might be nice to carpool. You know, save the environment and all that." Emma clearly didn't buy it, but she let it slide. "Sure thing. We'll leave in 10? The drive to campus was torturous for Jessica. Every turn made her flinch, every passing car sent her heart racing. She kept her eyes fixed on her lap, knuckles white as she gripped her backpack. "Jess?" Emma's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "We're here." Jessica looked up, surprised to find they were already in the campus parking lot. She'd been so lost in her fear that she'd missed the entire journey. "Thanks for the ride," she mumbled, practically leaping out of the car. "No problem," Emma called after her. "Text me if you need a ride home." Jessica waved in acknowledgement, already hurrying towards her first class. She just needed to get through the day. Everything would be fine if she could just focus on her studies and forget about that stupid dream. But as she settled into her seat in the lecture hall, Jessica found it impossible to concentrate. The professor's words blurred into meaningless noise as her mind kept drifting back to the mountain road, the crash, the fire. "Ms. Thompson?" Jessica startled, realizing the professor was addressing her. "I'm sorry, what?" Professor Harris frowned. "I asked if you could explain the concept of cognitive dissonance to the class." Jessica's mind raced. Cognitive dissonance. She knew this. It was the discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs simultaneously, like believing you're a safe driver while also being terrified of getting behind the wheel because of a dream that felt too real to ignore. It's, she stammered, aware of her classmates' eyes on her. "It's when you have inconsistent thoughts or beliefs that cause psychological stress." Professor Harris nodded, though he still looked concerned. "That's correct, Ms. Thompson. Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted today." Jessica felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I'm fine, Professor. Just didn't sleep well last night." As the lecture continued, Jessica tried harder to focus, scribbling notes furiously. But the phantom pain of the crash lingered, making it hard to think about anything else. When class finally ended, Jessica bolted for the door, needing fresh air. She found a quiet spot under a tree on the quad and sank to the ground, her back against the rough bark. "Get a grip," she muttered to herself, running her hands through her hair. It was just a dream. Just a stupid, vivid dream. But even as she said the words, she knew she didn't believe them. The memory of the crash was too detailed, too real. The pain, the fear, the certainty of death. How could her mind have conjured all that from nothing? Jessica pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. Before she could talk herself out of it, she typed, "recurring nightmares about dying," into the search bar. The results made her blood run cold. Page after page of people describing similar experiences. Vivid dreams of death that felt more like memories than nightmares. Some claimed they were glimpses of past lives. Others believed they were premonitions of the future. "This is crazy," Jessica whispered, but she couldn't stop reading. She was so engrossed in her research that she didn't notice the time slipping by. The sun was setting by the time she looked up, startled to find the quad nearly empty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Hey, you okay? Need a ride home?" Jessica hesitated. The thought of getting in a car again made her nauseous. But she couldn't avoid it forever, could she? "Thanks, but I'm good," she texted back. "See you at home." Gathering her courage, Jessica made her way to the student parking lot. Her little blue Honda sat where she left it that morning, innocent and ordinary in the fading light. Jessica's hands trembled as she reached for her car keys, phantom pain shooting through her body as she remembered the impact of the crash, the heat of the flames. "It wasn't real," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "You're being ridiculous, Jess. Just get in the car and go home." Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar smell of her car air freshener hit her, and for a moment she relaxed. Then she turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and suddenly Jessica was back on that mountain road, careening towards the edge of the cliff. Her breath came in short gasps, her vision blurring with tears. "No, no, no," she whimpered, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. A sharp knock on her window made her scream. She turned to see a campus security guard peering in at her, concern etched on his face. "Miss?" His muffled voice came through the glass. "Are you all right?" Jessica forced herself to breathe, to nod. She rolled down the window. "I'm fine," she managed to say. Just a little tired." The guard didn't look convinced. "You sure you're okay to drive? I'd be happy to call you a cab if you need it." For a moment, Jessica was tempted to accept, but the thought of explaining her irrational fear to a stranger was too much to bear. "Really, I'm okay," she insisted, mustering a weak smile. "Thank you for checking." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "All right, drive safe now." As he walked away, Jessica took several deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. She could do this. It was just a short drive home. Nothing was going to happen. Slowly, carefully, she backed out of the parking space and pointed her car towards the exit. Each moment behind the wheel was agony, her body tense and ready for disaster. But nothing happened. No deer jumped out. No oil slicks appeared on the road. By the time Jessica pulled into her apartment complex, her breathing had almost returned to normal. She all but ran from the car to her apartment, fumbling with her keys in her haste to get inside. Only when the door was locked behind her did she allow herself to relax. Emma looked up from the couch, surprise evident on her face. "Jess, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica opened her mouth to brush off her concern, to insist once again that everything was fine. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she burst into tears. "Oh, Jess," Emma said softly, rushing to embrace her friend. "What's going on? Talk to me." And finally, Jessica did. Through her sobs, she told Emma everything. The vivid nightmare, the lingering pain, the paralyzing fear she'd felt behind the wheel. She told her about the research she'd done, the stories she'd read of others with similar experiences. When she finished, she looked up at Emma, half expecting to see judgment or disbelief. Instead, she saw only concern and compassion. "Oh, honey," Emma said, hugging her tightly. "That sounds terrifying. No wonder you've been so off today." Jessica sniffled, wiping her eyes. "You don't think I'm crazy?" Emma shook her head firmly. "Of course not. But I do think you need help dealing with this. Have you thought about talking to a therapist?" The suggestion made Jessica pause. A therapist? Could that really help with something like this? I don't know, she admitted. Maybe. If it happens again. Emma squeezed her hand. Just think about it, okay? In the meantime, why don't we have a quiet night in? I'll order pizza, we can watch a movie. Something to take your mind off things. Jessica nodded gratefully, allowing Emma to lead her to the couch. As they settled in for the evening, she felt some of the tension leave her body. Maybe this was all she needed, a night of normalcy to remind her that it was just a dream. But as the night wore on and bedtime approached, Jessica felt her anxiety rising again. What if she had another nightmare? What if this time it was even worse? As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Jessica made a silent plea to whatever might be listening. "Please," she whispered into the darkness. "Please just let me sleep. No more dreams. No more deaths. Please." But even as she drifted off, a part of her knew that her ordeal was far from over. The mountain road was waiting for her, and sooner or later she would have to face it again. Jessica's eyes snapped open, her heart already racing. She didn't need to look around to know where she was. The soft leather of the steering wheel beneath her fingers, the faint pine scent of the air freshener, the distant hoot of an owl. It was all horrifyingly familiar. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not again. Please, not again." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The car was already moving, its headlights cutting through the thick darkness of the mountain road. Jessica's hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, but she knew it was futile. She was a passenger in her own body, helpless to change the course of events. "Okay, Jess," she said to herself, trying to keep her voice steady. "You know what's coming. Maybe you can change it this time." As the car rounded a bend, Jessica's eyes darted to the side of the road, searching for the deer that had caused her to swerve in the first dream. But the roadside was empty. Nothing but dark trees and shadows. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. "It's different," she breathed. "Maybe this time." Her words were cut short by a blinding light that suddenly flooded her rearview mirror. Jessica squinted, her heart leaping into her throat as she saw a massive truck barreling down the mountain road behind her, its high beams turning night into day. "No, no, no!" Jessica chanted, pressing down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, engine whining as it climbed the steep road, but the truck kept gaining, its grille filling her mirror. Jessica's mind raced. This wasn't how it happened before. There was no deer, no cliff, but somehow this felt even worse. The inevitability of it, the helplessness as the truck bore down on her. The blaring of a horn cut through the night, so loud it made Jessica's ears ring. She realized with horror that the truck was trying to pass her on the narrow mountain road. "Are you crazy?" she screamed, though she knew the truck driver couldn't hear her. "There's no room." But the truck kept coming, pulling alongside her car. Jessica looked over and her blood ran cold. The driver's seat was empty. In that moment of shock, Jessica's hands jerked on the wheel. The car swerved, tires screeching as they lost traction on the winding road. Time seemed to slow as Jessica felt the car begin to slide sideways, directly into the path of the driverless truck. The impact was catastrophic. Jessica felt every excruciating moment as the truck crushed her car, the metal frame crumpling like tissue paper. The sound was deafening. Screeching tires, crumpling metal, shattering glass, and underneath it all, Jessica's own scream of terror. Pain exploded through her body as she was thrown about in the wreckage. She felt bones snap, flesh tear. The coppery taste of blood filled her mouth. But worst of all was the feeling of being trapped, pinned in the twisted metal that had once been her car. As the dust settled, Jessica found herself staring up at the star-filled sky through the shattered remains of her windshield. She tried to move, to call for help, but her body wouldn't respond. She could only lie there, each breath sending waves of agony through her broken body. Then she smelled it, the acrid scent of gasoline. "No," she whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, not like this." But fate, or whatever cruel force was orchestrating this nightmare, had no mercy. Jessica saw the first flicker of flames in her peripheral vision, heard the soft whoosh as the fire caught. The heat built quickly, far too quickly to be natural. Jessica could feel it on her skin, could hear the crackle of flames growing ever closer. She wanted to scream, to thrash, to do anything to escape. But she was trapped, helpless, forced to endure every moment of terror as the fire approached. The flames reached her, and the pain was beyond anything Jessica could have imagined. She felt her skin blister and char, felt the fire consume her. Her screams echoed through the mountain valley, raw and primal. Just when Jessica thought she could endure no more, when she was certain that death must finally claim her, everything shifted. The pain vanished, replaced by a sensation of falling. Jessica gasped, her eyes flying open. She was back in her dorm room, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. For a long moment she just lay there, chest heaving as she gulped in air. Her hands flew over her body, expecting to find charred flesh and broken bones. But there was nothing. No injuries, no blood, just the phantom memory of pain and the lingering scent of smoke that wasn't really there. "Jess?" Emma's voice came through the door, thick with sleep but tinged with worry. "Are you okay? I heard you screaming again." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but all that came out was a choked sob. The door creaked open and Emma's concerned face appeared. "Oh, Jess," she said softly, crossing the room to sit on the edge of the bed. "Another nightmare?" Jessica nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Emma wrapped her in a hug and Jessica clung to her friend like a lifeline. "It was worse this time," Jessica finally managed to say, her voice hoarse. "So much worse." Emma stroked her hair soothingly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jessica shook her head violently. "I can't. I can't." "Okay," Emma said gently. "You don't have to. But Jess, this can't go on. You need help." Jessica pulled back, wiping her eyes. "What do you mean?" Emma's face was serious in the dim light of the room. "I mean professional help, Jess. These nightmares, they're destroying you. You're not sleeping. You're barely eating. You flinch every time you hear a car outside. This isn't healthy." Deep down, Jessica knew her friend was right. But the thought of telling a stranger about her dreams, about the vivid deaths she experienced night after night, made her stomach churn. "I don't know, Em," she said hesitantly. "What if they think I'm crazy?" Emma squeezed her hand. "They won't. And even if they did, isn't that better than going through this every night?" Jessica bit her lip, considering. The memory of the flames, of being trapped and burning alive, was still fresh in her mind. Could she really endure that again? "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, I'll try." Emma smiled, relief evident on her face. "Good. We'll look into therapists in the morning, okay? For now, try to get some rest." But as Emma left the room, closing the door softly behind her, Jessica felt panic rising in her chest. Sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant death. She reached for her phone, hands shaking as she pulled up her browser. "How to stay awake," she typed, desperate for any solution that would keep her from reliving that horror. As the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Jessica sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and coffee cups. Her eyes were bloodshot, her body jittery from caffeine, but she was awake. She'd made it through the night without sleeping, without dying again. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that she couldn't do this forever. Sooner or later she would have to sleep. And when she did, the mountain road would be waiting for her. Jessica hugged her knees to her chest, rocking slightly as she stared at the lightening sky. "What's happening to me?" she whispered to the empty room. There was no answer, only the soft ticking of her clock and the distant sounds of the campus coming to life outside. Another day was beginning, but for Jessica, it felt like time was running out. How many more deaths could she endure before she lost her grip on reality completely? As she contemplated this, a new, terrifying thought occurred to her. What if these weren't just dreams? What if, somehow, they were warnings? Premonitions of a real danger waiting for her. The thought made her blood run cold. Jessica shook her head, trying to dispel the idea. That was crazy talk. Premonitions weren't real. She was just stressed, that's all. The therapist would help. They had to. But as Jessica finally dragged herself out of bed to face the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that these dreams were more than just her subconscious playing cruel tricks. They felt like a message, a warning. And if that was true, what was she supposed to do about it? With trembling hands, Jessica began to get dressed, her mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. One thing was certain, she couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, and soon. Before these dreams, these deaths, consumed her completely, the harsh fluorescent lights of the university library buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on Jessica's pale face. She sat hunched over a computer, her eyes bloodshot and ringed with dark circles. It was 3:27 a.m. and the library was nearly empty save for a few other night owls scattered among the stacks. Jessica's fingers flew across the keyboard, her search history a testament to her desperation. Recurring dreams of death, premonitions in dreams, how to stop nightmares, sleep deprivation side effects. She'd been here for hours, skipping her classes and ignoring the concerned texts from Emma. The words on the screen blurred together, but she couldn't stop. She had to find an answer, had to find a way to make the dreams stop. A hand on her shoulder made her jump, a small scream escaping her lips before she could stop it. "Whoa, easy there," a voice said. Jessica turned to see Mark, a guy from her psychology class, looking at her with concern. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. You okay, Jess? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, just researching for a paper." Mark glanced at her screen, his brow furrowing. Dream interpretation and sleep disorders? That for Harris's class? Something like that, Jessica mumbled, quickly minimizing the windows. Mark hesitated, then sat down in the chair next to her. "Look, I don't want to overstep, but you haven't been in class for days, and now you're here in the middle of the night looking like you haven't slept in a week. What's going on?" Jessica opened her mouth to brush him off, to insist she was fine. But the words stuck in her throat. She was so tired of pretending, of carrying this burden alone. I've been having these dreams," she said softly, her voice cracking. "Nightmares, really. They feel so real, Mark. I die. Every single night. And each time it's worse than the last." Mark's eyes widened. "Jesus, Jess, that sounds horrible. Have you talked to anyone about this? A counselor, maybe?" Jessica shook her head. "Emma wants me to, but I'm scared, Mark. What if they think I'm crazy? What if there's really something wrong with me?" "Hey," Mark said gently, placing a hand on her arm. "Having nightmares doesn't make you crazy. But not dealing with them? That might. You need help, Jess." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. "I know. I don't know how to make it stop. I'm afraid to sleep. Afraid to drive. I can barely function anymore." Mark was quiet for a moment, then he stood up. "Come on," he said, offering her his hand. "Let's get out of here. You need some fresh air and a decent meal, not more computer screens." Jessica hesitated, then nodded, allowing Mark to help her up. As they walked out of the library into the cool night air, she felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Maybe talking about it, acknowledging the problem out loud, was a first step toward solving it. They ended up at an all-night diner a few blocks from campus. Jessica picked at a plate of fries while Mark sipped his coffee, listening intently as she poured out the whole story, the recurring dreams, the vivid deaths, the paralyzing fear that had taken over her life. "And now I'm terrified to even close my eyes," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Mark." Mark leaned back in the booth, his face thoughtful. "It sounds to me like your subconscious is trying to tell you something, Jess. These dreams, they're not random. They're always about dying in a car crash, right?" Jessica nodded. "Always on the same mountain road, but it's different each time. Last night I burned to death." She shuddered at the memory. "Okay, so let's think about this logically," Mark said, slipping into what Jessica recognized as his psych student mode. "What does driving represent to you? Freedom? Independence? Control?" Jessica considered this. "I guess all of those things. I worked so hard to get my license, to save up for my car. It was like a symbol of becoming an adult, you know?" Mark nodded encouragingly. "So maybe these dreams aren't literally about dying in a car crash. Maybe they're about a fear of losing control, of losing your independence." It made sense in a way, but it didn't explain the visceral reality of the dreams, the pain that felt all too real. "But why now?" Jessica asked. "Why are these dreams starting all of a sudden?" Mark shrugged. "Stress? The pressure of college, being away from home. It could be a lot of things, but Jess, the why doesn't matter as much as how you deal with it. You need to talk to a professional." Jessica sighed, pushing her plate away. "You sound like Emma." "Well, Emma's right," Mark said firmly. "Look, my sister went through something similar a few years back. Night terrors, panic attacks, the whole 9 yards. She started seeing this therapist who specializes in sleep disorders and PTSD. It really helped her. I could give you her number if you want." Jessica felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "You'd do that?" Mark smiled. "Of course. That's what friends are for, right?" As they left the diner, Jessica felt a bit lighter. She had a plan now, a next step. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. "Thanks, Mark," she said as they walked back towards campus. "For listening, for helping, Her words were cut off by the roar of an engine. A truck rumbled past them, its headlights momentarily blinding in the dark street. Jessica froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, she was back on that mountain road, the driverless truck bearing down on her. "Jess? Jessica!" Mark's voice sounded far away. She could feel his hands on her shoulders, shaking her gently. "Hey, come back to me. You're okay. You're safe." Jessica blinked, the real world slowly coming back into focus. She was on the sidewalk, Mark's worried face in front of her. There was no truck, no mountain road, just a normal street on a normal night. I'm sorry," she stammered, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I don't know what happened." Mark's face was grim. "I think you just had a panic attack, Jess. Come on, let's get you home." The walk back to her dorm was a blur. Jessica was vaguely aware of Mark's arm around her shoulders guiding her, but her mind was reeling. She'd had panic attacks before, but never like this. Never so vivid, so all-consuming. At her door, Mark hesitated. "Will you be okay? I can stay if you want, or call Emma." Jessica shook her head. "No, I'll be fine. Thank you, Mark, really." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Okay. But promise me you'll call that therapist tomorrow. And Jess, try to get some sleep. You can't keep going like this." After he left, Jessica stood in the middle of her room feeling lost. The thought of sleeping terrified her, but she knew Mark was right. She couldn't stay awake forever. With trembling hands, she changed into her pajamas and crawled into bed. She left the lights on, unable to face the darkness. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, she tried to focus on her breathing, on the reality of her safe, familiar room. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the truck, heard the crunch of metal, felt the heat of the flames. Jessica's eyes snapped open, her heart racing. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "I can't do this, I can't." She reached for her phone, pulling up her browser again. But this time, instead of searching for dream interpretations or ways to stay awake, she typed in something new. How to lucid dream. If she couldn't stop the dreams, maybe she could control them. Maybe she could change the outcome, save herself from dying night after night. As the hours ticked by, Jessica immersed herself in techniques for lucid dreaming. Reality checks, ways to recognize when you're in a dream. She scribbled notes, made lists of things to try. The sun was rising by the time she finally fell into an exhausted sleep, her phone still clutched in her hand. And as she drifted off, a small part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But deep down, she knew the mountain road was waiting for her. And this time, she was determined to face it head-on. Jessica sat in the waiting room of Dr. Amelia Chen's office, her leg bouncing nervously. The walls were a soothing shade of blue, adorned with abstract paintings that were probably meant to be calming. To Jessica, they looked like swirling vortexes threatening to pull her in. She glanced at her watch. 2:57 p.m. Her appointment was at 3 Oz. She'd arrived an hour early, unable to bear sitting in her dorm room any longer. The receptionist had given her a concerned look but hadn't commented. Jessica's eyes darted to the door every time it opened, her heart racing. What if Dr. Chen took one look at her and decided she was beyond help? What if talking about the dreams made them worse? "Jessica Thompson?" a gentle voice called. Jessica's head snapped up to see a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a warm smile. Dr. Chen, she presumed. "That's me," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stood. Dr. Chen's smile widened. "It's nice to meet you, Jessica. Please, come in." The office was cozy, with a comfortable-looking couch and a plush armchair. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with psychology texts and self-help books. Jessica perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "So, Jessica," Dr. Chen began, settling into the armchair across from her. "What brings you here today?" Jessica took a deep breath. She'd rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now that it was here, the words seemed to stick in her throat. I've been having nightmares," she finally managed. "Really bad ones. Every night." Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "Can you tell me more about these nightmares?" Jessica closed her eyes, the familiar scene playing out in her mind. "I'm driving on this mountain road. It's always the same road, and I always die. But it's different each time. Sometimes I drive off a cliff. Sometimes I crash into a truck. Last time I burned to death." Her voice broke on the last words, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes. When she opened them, she expected to see shock or disbelief on Dr. Chen's face. Instead, she saw only compassion. "That sounds terrifying, Jessica," Dr. Chen said softly. "How long has this been going on?" "About 2 weeks now," Jessica replied, wiping her eyes. "But it feels like forever. I'm afraid to sleep. I can barely function during the day. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. "You're not losing your mind, Jessica. Recurring nightmares can be a symptom of underlying stress or trauma. Have you experienced any significant changes or stressful events recently?" Jessica shook her head. "Not really. I mean, college is stressful, but nothing out of the ordinary. That's what makes this so frustrating. There's no reason for these dreams." "Dreams don't always have a clear logical reason," Dr. Chen explained. "They're often our brain's way of processing emotions or fears we might not even be consciously aware of. Let's talk about the dreams themselves. You mentioned you're always driving. How do you feel about driving in real life?" Jessica considered this. "I used to love it. It was freedom, you know? But now, Now I can barely look at my car without having a panic attack. Dr. Chen made a note on her pad. And in the dreams, are you alone in the car? Yes. Jessica nodded. Always alone. Interesting. Dr. Chen mused. Often cars in dreams can represent our journey through life, our sense of control. The fact that you're alone might suggest feelings of isolation or a fear of facing challenges on your own. Jessica felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all this after all. So what do I do? How do I make them stop? Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. There's no quick fix, Jessica. Dealing with recurring nightmares takes time and work. But there are strategies we can try. First, I'd like you to start keeping a dream journal. Write down everything you remember as soon as you wake up, no matter how small the detail. Jessica nodded eagerly. I can do that. What else? We'll also work on some relaxation techniques to help you before bed. And I want to teach you about lucid dreaming. It's a technique where you become aware that you're dreaming and can sometimes control the dream. Jessica's eyes widened. I've been reading about that. I tried it last night, but it didn't work. Dr. Chen smiled encouragingly. It takes practice. We'll work on it together. Now, I also want to talk about medication options. There are some medications that can help reduce nightmares, especially in cases of PTSD or anxiety disorders. Jessica felt her stomach clench. Medication? Do you think there's something really wrong with me? Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. Having nightmares doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, Jessica, but if they're interfering with your daily life as much as you've described, medication might help you get some relief while we work on addressing the underlying issues. They spent the rest of the session discussing Jessica's sleep habits, her daily routine, and her support system. By the time the hour was up, Jessica felt drained, but also, for the first time in weeks, hopeful. Here's a prescription for a low dose of prazosin, Dr. Chen said, handing Jessica a slip of paper. It's commonly used to treat nightmares, especially in PTSD patients. And I want to see you again next week. In the meantime, start that dream journal and try the relaxation exercises we discussed. Jessica nodded, clutching the prescription like a lifeline. Thank you, Dr. Chen. Really. As she left the office, Jessica felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't cured, not by a long shot, but she had a plan now. She had hope. That evening, Jessica sat cross-legged on her bed, a new notebook open in front of her. She'd filled the first page with notes from her session with Dr. Chen, and now she was preparing for bed with a mix of anticipation and dread. Emma poked her head into the room. Hey, how'd it go with the therapist? Jessica managed a small smile. It was good, actually. She gave me some things to try and a prescription. Emma's face lit up. That's great, Jess. I'm so proud of you for going. Thanks, Em, Jessica said softly. For everything. I don't know what I'd do without you. Emma crossed the room and gave Jessica a tight hug. That's what friends are for. Now get some sleep, okay? And remember, I'm right next door if you need me. As Emma left, Jessica took a deep breath and swallowed the small pill Dr. Chen had prescribed. Then she lay down, forcing herself to relax each muscle group as Dr. Chen had taught her. You're safe, she whispered to herself. It's just a dream. You're in control. Despite her fear, exhaustion soon took over and Jessica felt herself drifting off. As sleep claimed her, she clung to one last conscious thought. I'm dreaming. This is a dream. I'm in control. The mountain road materialized around her, as vivid and terrifying as ever. But this time, as Jessica gripped the steering wheel, she felt a flicker of something new. Awareness. This is a dream, she said aloud, her voice shaky but determined. I'm dreaming, and I'm in control. The car swerved, and Jessica saw the familiar truck appear in her rearview mirror. But instead of panicking, she took a deep breath. No, she said firmly. Not this time. I choose what happens. With all her willpower, Jessica imagined the truck disappearing. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, like a mirage fading in the desert, the truck shimmered and vanished. Jessica let out a breathless laugh of disbelief and relief. She'd done it. She'd changed the dream. But her victory was short-lived. The road ahead began to twist and warp, defying the laws of physics. The sky turned a sickly green, and Jessica felt the car begin to lift off the ground. "No!" she cried out. "This isn't what I want!" But the dream was slipping out of her control. The car spun wildly, and Jessica felt the familiar terror rising in her chest. As the ground rushed up to meet her, she squeezed her eyes shut and screamed. Jessica bolted upright in bed, her heart pounding. She was in her room, safe in her bed. Sunlight streamed through the window. She'd made it through the night. With shaking hands, she reached for her dream journal and began to write. The nightmare hadn't stopped entirely, but she'd controlled it, if only for a moment. It was progress. As she wrote, Jessica felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Fear was still there, yes, but also a spark of determination. She'd faced the nightmare and, for a brief moment, won. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One day at a time, she murmured to herself, echoing Dr. Chen's words. One dream at a time. She didn't know if she'd ever fully conquer these nightmares, but for the first time since they'd started, Jessica felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. And for now, that was enough to keep going, to face another day, another night, another dream. Jessica stared at the small white pill in her palm, her reflection distorted in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles ringed her eyes, a testament to weeks of fitful sleep and terrifying nightmares. Dr. Chen had assured her that prazosin was safe, that it could help reduce the intensity of her dreams. But after last night's partial success with lucid dreaming, Jessica hesitated. "Come on, Jess," she muttered to herself. "It's just a pill. It's supposed to help." With a deep breath, she tossed the pill into her mouth and washed it down with a gulp of water. As she made her way back to her bed, she tried to focus on the relaxation techniques Dr. Chen had taught her. "You're safe," she whispered, settling under the covers. "It's just a dream. You're in control." As sleep began to claim her, Jessica clung to consciousness for as long as she could, repeating her mantra, "I'm dreaming. This is a dream. I'm in control." The familiar mountain road materialized around her, but something was different. The colors seemed more vivid, almost painfully bright. The trees lining the road twisted and writhed like living things, their branches reaching out towards her car like grasping fingers. Jessica gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "This is a dream," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "I'm in control." But the words felt hollow, drowned out by the surreal landscape surrounding her. The road ahead began to undulate, rising and falling like waves on an ocean. Jessica's stomach lurched as the car crested each peak, momentarily airborne before crashing back down. "No," she whimpered. "This isn't right. Wake up, Jess, wake up." But she couldn't. The dream held her in its grip, more vivid and terrifying than ever before. The sky above turned a sickly green, roiling with storm clouds that seemed to form faces, leering down at her. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. Jessica slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt mere inches from the person. Her heart nearly stopped as she recognized the face staring back at her through the windshield. It was herself. The other Jessica smiled, a twisted, unnatural grin that stretched too wide across her face. "Going somewhere?" her doppelganger asked, its voice a distorted echo of her own. "This isn't real," Jessica said, her voice trembling. "You're not real. I'm in control here." The other Jessica laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Are you sure about that?" Before Jessica could respond, her double began to change. Its skin bubbled and melted, reforming into a grotesque amalgamation of all the ways she had died in her previous dreams. One arm was crushed and mangled, the other blackened and charred. Half of its face was bloody and torn, while the other half was pristine, still wearing that terrible smile. Jessica screamed, throwing the car into reverse. But the wheels spun uselessly, unable to gain traction on the writhing road beneath. The monstrous version of herself reached out, its fingers elongating into razor-sharp claws that scraped against the windshield. "You can't escape yourself, Jessica," it hissed, its voice now a chorus of all her past screams. "You can't outrun your fears." The claws pierced through the glass, inching closer to Jessica's face. She pressed herself back against the seat, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Wake up," she pleaded, squeezing her eyes shut. "Please, God, let me wake up." But the dream wouldn't release her. She felt the cold touch of those claws against her cheek, and her eyes snapped open. The monster that wore her face was now inside the car, its twisted body contorting to fit in the passenger seat. "Why are you doing this?" Jessica sobbed. "What do you want from me?" The creature's smile widened impossibly further, splitting its face in two. "I want you to face the truth, Jessica. The truth you've been running from." "What truth?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. The monster leaned in close, its breath hot and rancid against her ear. "That you're the one behind the wheel. You're the one in control. And you're the one who keeps choosing to die." With those words, the creature lunged forward, its jaws unhinging like a snake's. Jessica felt a moment of searing pain as it began to devour her, starting with her face. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was being consumed, not just physically but mentally, her very essence being torn apart and absorbed by this nightmarish version of herself. As the pain reached a crescendo, the dream shattered like a broken mirror. Jessica bolted upright in bed, a scream tearing from her throat. She thrashed wildly, tangled in her sweat-soaked sheets, her mind still half trapped in the nightmare. Jessica!" Emma's voice cut through the fog of terror. Jessica felt hands on her shoulders, shaking her gently. "It's okay. You're awake. You're safe." Slowly, reality began to reassert itself. Jessica's eyes focused on Emma's worried face, then darted around the familiar surroundings of her dorm room. She was safe. She was awake. It was over. But the relief was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, Jessica became aware of a sharp pain in her arm. She looked down to see 4 parallel scratches running from her wrist to her elbow, beads of blood welling up along the marks. "Oh my God," Emma gasped, following Jessica's gaze. "Did you do that to yourself?" Jessica stared at the scratches, her mind reeling. They were in the exact same place where the monster in her dream had grabbed her. I don't know," she stammered. "I don't remember." Emma was already moving, grabbing the first aid kit they kept in the room. "It's okay. We'll get you cleaned up. Just try to breathe, Jess." As Emma tended to her arm, Jessica's thoughts raced. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, more than any of the others. And now this. Had she really clawed at herself in her sleep? Or was something more sinister at work? "There," Emma said, finishing up with a bandage. "All better. Do you want to talk about it?" Jessica shook her head, still trembling. "I can't. Not right now." Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Okay, but I'm here when you're ready. Do you want me to stay with you?" "No," Jessica said quickly, then softened her tone at Emma's hurt look. "I mean, thank you, but I need to be alone for a bit. To process." After Emma reluctantly left, Jessica reached for her dream journal with shaking hands. As she began to write, tears splashed onto the page, smearing the ink. The dream had been horrifying enough, but the words of her monstrous doppelganger echoed in her mind. "You're the one who keeps choosing to die." What did that mean? Was her subconscious trying to tell her something? Or was it just the product of her fears and the new medication? Jessica's eyes fell on the bottle of Prazosin on her nightstand. With a sudden surge of anger, she grabbed it and hurled it across the room. The pills scattered across the floor, tiny white reminders of her failure to find an easy solution. She buried her face in her hands, sobs racking her body. She was tired. So tired. Tired of the fear, tired of the sleepless nights, tired of feeling like she was losing her grip on reality. As the first light of dawn began to creep through her window, Jessica made a decision. She couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and dialed Dr. Chen's emergency number. It rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Dr. Chen, it's Jessica Thompson. I need help. Can I come see you today? It's urgent." As she hung up, having secured an emergency appointment for later that morning, Jessica felt a mix of dread and determination. She didn't know what Dr. Chen would say, what new strategies they might try, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't face another night like this one. Something had to give, and soon. Jessica looked at her reflection in the mirror, taking in the wild eyes, the tangled hair, the bandage on her arm. "No more running," she whispered to herself. "It's time to face whatever this is head on." As she began to get ready for her appointment, Jessica felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a grim resolve. Whatever was causing these nightmares, whatever truth her subconscious was trying to tell her, she would face it. Because the alternative, losing herself to these dreams, to the terror that threatened to consume her, was no longer an option. It was time to take control, in her dreams and in her waking life. It was time to fight back. The harsh fluorescent lights of the 24-hour convenience store buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on Jessica's pale face. She stood in the middle of the aisle, staring at the shelves stocked with energy drinks and caffeine pills. Her hands trembled as she reached for a bottle, then another and another. "Hey, you okay, miss?" The clerk's voice made her jump. She turned to see a young man eyeing her with concern. Jessica forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Fine, just pulling an all-nighter for exams." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was easier than explaining the truth. How could she tell this stranger that she was terrified of falling asleep? That every time she closed her eyes, she died in increasingly horrific ways? She approached the counter, arms laden with enough stimulants to keep a small army awake. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but rang up her purchases without comment. As Jessica left the store, the cool night air hit her face, momentarily clearing the fog of exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She checked her watch. 3:17 a.m. Another night stretching endlessly before her. Another battle against sleep. Back in her dorm room, Jessica arranged her arsenal on her desk. Energy drinks, caffeine pills, her laptop open to a playlist of loud, aggressive music. Anything to keep her awake, to stave off the nightmares that waited in the darkness of sleep. She popped open a can, the sharp hiss breaking the silence of the early morning. As she took a long swig, her eyes fell on the prescription bottle of Prazosin, still scattered across the floor from when she'd thrown it earlier. Dr. Chen's words echoed in her mind. "Avoiding sleep isn't a solution, Jessica. It's only going to make things worse." Jessica shook her head, as if she could physically dislodge the memory. "What does she know?" she muttered to herself. "She's not the one dying every night." Hours passed in a caffeinated haze. Jessica paced her small room, did jumping jacks, anything to keep moving, to keep awake. But as the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, she felt her resolve wavering. A soft knock at her door made her heart leap into her throat. "Jess?" Emma's voice came through, thick with sleep but tinged with worry. "Are you up? I heard noises." Jessica froze, unsure whether to answer. After a moment, she heard Emma sigh and walk away. Guilt gnawed at her. She was pushing everyone away, isolating herself in her fear. As the day wore on, Jessica felt herself unraveling. The caffeine that had kept her wired now left her jittery and nauseous. Her thoughts raced, jumping from one scenario to another. What if she never slept again? What if the dreams followed her into the waking world? By afternoon, she was a wreck. She sat on the floor, back against her bed, surrounded by empty cans and pill bottles. Her phone buzzed incessantly, missed calls and texts from Emma, from her parents, from Dr. Chen. She ignored them all. A new, terrifying thought began to take root in her mind. What if the only way to escape the dreams was to make them real? To face her fear head-on once and for all? With shaking hands, she reached for her car keys. The metal felt cold and heavy in her palm, a promise and a threat all at once. Jessica stumbled to her feet, the room spinning around her. She made it to the door before a wave of dizziness hit her, sending her crashing to her knees. "Jess? Oh my God, Jess!" Emma's voice seemed to come from far away. Jessica felt hands on her shoulders, heard the panic in her friend's voice as if through water. "I have to go," Jessica mumbled, trying to stand. "Have to make it stop." "Make what stop?" "Jess, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Jessica looked up at Emma, really seeing her for the first time in days. The concern in her friend's eyes broke something inside her. "The dreams," she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't do it anymore, Em. I keep dying every night, and it hurts. It hurts so much." Emma's face paled. "Oh, Jess, why didn't you tell me it was getting worse? Come on, let's get you up." With Emma's help, Jessica made it back to her bed. She sank onto the mattress, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I'm calling Dr. Chen," Emma said firmly, reaching for Jessica's phone. "No!" Jessica cried, grabbing Emma's wrist. "No more doctors, no more pills, I need it to stop." Emma sat beside her, gently prying Jessica's fingers from her wrist. "And how are you planning to make it stop, Jess? Where were you going with your keys?" Jessica looked away, shame burning in her cheeks. "I thought, maybe if I made it real, if I faced it—" "Jesus, Jess," Emma breathed, realization dawning on her face. "You were going to crash your car? Are you insane?" The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She curled in on herself, sobs racking her body. "Maybe I am," she choked out. "Maybe I'm losing my mind." Emma wrapped her arms around Jessica, holding her tight. "You're not insane. You're exhausted and terrified. But this isn't the answer, Jess. You need help. Real help." For a long moment, they sat in silence, Jessica's sobs gradually subsiding into hiccuping breaths. Finally, she spoke, her voice small and broken. "What if it never stops, Em? What if I have to live with this forever?" Emma pulled back, looking Jessica in the eye. "Then we'll face it together. But first, you need to sleep. Real, proper sleep." Jessica shook her head violently. "No, I can't. The dreams—" "I'll be right here," Emma interrupted. "I'll wake you if it looks like you're having a nightmare. But Jess, you can't go on like this. You're going to kill yourself one way or another if you don't rest." The truth of Emma's words hit Jessica hard. She was at the end of her rope, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she just needed to surrender to sleep, to face whatever came. "Okay," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Okay." Emma helped her change into pajamas, then tucked her into bed like a child. As Jessica's eyes began to close, heavy with days of missed sleep, she felt Emma's hand in hers. "I'm right here." Emma's voice came from far away. "You're safe. Just sleep." Jessica felt herself drifting, falling into the familiar darkness. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever waited for her in her dreams, she wouldn't face it alone. The mountain road materialized around her, as vivid as ever. But something was different. As Jessica gripped the steering wheel, she realized what it was. The passenger seat wasn't empty. Emma sat beside her, a comforting presence in the midst of the nightmare landscape. "It's okay, Jess," Dream Emma said, her voice steady and sure. "We'll get through this together." As the road twisted and turned before them, Jessica felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. The dream continued, filled with the usual terrors, the truck, the cliff, the fire. But each time Jessica felt herself starting to panic, she looked over at Emma. Her friend's presence anchored her, reminded her that this wasn't real, that she would wake up. Her phone buzzed incessantly, missed calls and texts from Emma, from her parents, from Dr. Chen. She ignored them all. A new, terrifying thought began to take root in her mind. What if the only way to escape the dreams was to make them real? To face her fear head-on once and for all? With shaking hands, she reached for her car keys. The metal felt cold and heavy in her palm, a promise and a threat all at once. Jessica stumbled to her feet, the room spinning around her. She made it to the door before a wave of dizziness hit her, sending her crashing to her knees. "Jess? Oh my God, Jess!" Emma's voice seemed to come from far away. Jessica felt hands on her shoulders, heard the panic in her friend's voice as if through water. "I have to go," Jessica mumbled, trying to stand. "Have to make it stop." "Make what stop?" "Jess, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Jessica looked up at Emma, really seeing her for the first time in days. The concern in her friend's eyes broke something inside her. "The dreams," she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't do it anymore, Em. I keep dying every night. And it hurts. It hurts so much." Emma's face paled. "Oh, Jess. Why didn't you tell me it was getting worse? Come on, let's get you up." With Emma's help, Jessica made it back to her bed. She sank onto the mattress, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I'm calling Dr. Chen," Emma said firmly, reaching for Jessica's phone. "No!" Jessica cried, grabbing Emma's wrist. "No more doctors, no more pills. I need it to stop." Emma sat beside her, gently prying Jessica's fingers from her wrist. "And how were you planning to make it stop, Jess? Where were you going with your keys?" Jessica looked away, shame burning in her cheeks. "I thought, maybe if I made it real, if I faced it—" "Jesus, Jess," Emma breathed, realization dawning on her face. "You were going to crash your car? Are you insane?" The words hit Jessica like a physical blow. She curled in on herself, sobs racking her body. "Maybe I am," she choked out. "Maybe I'm losing my mind." Emma wrapped her arms around Jessica, holding her tight. "You're not insane. You're exhausted and terrified. But this isn't the answer, Jess. You need help. Real help." For a long moment they sat in silence, Jessica's sobs gradually subsiding into hiccuping breaths. Finally she spoke, her voice small and broken. "What if it never stops, Em? What if I have to live with this forever?" Emma pulled back, looking Jessica in the eye. "Then we'll face it together. But first, you need to sleep. Real, proper sleep." Jessica shook her head violently. "No, I can't. The dreams—" "I'll be right here," Emma interrupted. "I'll wake you if it looks like you're having a nightmare, but Jess, you can't go on like this. You're going to kill yourself one way or another if you don't rest." The truth of Emma's words hit Jessica hard. She was at the end of her rope, teetering on the edge of a breakdown. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she just needed to surrender to sleep, to face whatever came. "Okay," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Okay." Emma helped her change into pajamas, then tucked her into bed like a child. As Jessica's eyes began to close, heavy with days of missed sleep, she felt Emma's hand in hers. "I'm right here." Emma's voice came from far away. "You're safe. Just sleep." Jessica felt herself drifting, falling into the familiar darkness. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever waited for her in her dreams, she wouldn't face it alone. The mountain road materialized around her, as vivid as ever. But something was different. As Jessica gripped the steering wheel, she realized what it was. The passenger seat wasn't empty. Emma sat beside her, a comforting presence in the midst of the nightmare landscape. "It's okay, Jess," Dream Emma said, her voice steady and sure. "We'll get through this together." As the road twisted and turned before them, Jessica felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. The dream continued, filled with the usual terrors, the truck, the cliff, the fire. But each time Jessica felt herself starting to panic, she looked over at Emma. Her friend's presence anchored her, reminded her that this wasn't real, that she would wake up. When Jessica finally opened her eyes, sunlight was streaming through her window. She'd slept through the night for the first time in weeks. Emma was still there, dozing in the chair beside her bed, their hands still clasped together. As Jessica stirred, Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" Jessica took a moment to assess. She was still tired, still afraid. The nightmares weren't gone, but something had shifted. She didn't feel alone anymore. "Better," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I think I'm ready to really fight this now." Emma smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's my girl. And I'll be right here with you, every step of the way." As they began to plan their next steps, a return visit to Dr. Chen, a new sleep routine, strategies for coping with the nightmares, Jessica felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The road ahead would be hard, she knew, but she wasn't walking it alone anymore. And for now, that was enough to keep going, to face another day, another night, another dream. Because sometimes, the first step towards healing is simply admitting you need help. And Jessica had finally taken that step. The waiting room of Dr. Chen's office felt different this time. Jessica sat straighter in her chair, her eyes clearer despite the lingering exhaustion. Emma sat beside her, a steady presence that kept Jessica's nerves from completely unraveling. "You've got this, Jess," Emma whispered, squeezing her hand as Dr. Chen's door opened. Dr. Chen's eyes widened slightly as she took in Jessica's appearance, the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the determined set of her jaw. "Jessica, please come in," Dr. Chen said, her voice warm but concerned. She glanced at Emma. "Would you like your friend to join us?" Jessica nodded. "Yes, please. I need her here." Once they were settled in Dr. Chen's office, Jessica took a deep breath and began to recount everything that had happened since their last session. The intensifying nightmares, the desperate attempts to stay awake, the moment of crisis that had brought her to the brink of a terrible decision. Her voice shook at times, but she pushed through, Emma's hand in hers anchoring her to the present. Dr. Chen listened intently, her face a mask of professional concern. When Jessica finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. "Thank you for sharing all of this, Jessica," Dr. Chen finally said. "I can see how much you've been struggling. I'm glad you reached out for help when you did." Jessica nodded, feeling a mix of shame and relief. "I know I should have called you sooner. I felt like I was losing control of everything." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Jessica, I want you to understand something. What you're experiencing, these vivid, recurring nightmares, it's a real condition. It's not just bad dreams, and it's not something you should have to face alone." "So what do we do?" Emma asked, her voice tight with worry. "How do we help her?" Dr. Chen sat back, considering. "I think we need to take a multifaceted approach. First, Jessica, I want to adjust your medication. The prazosin clearly wasn't effective and may have even exacerbated your symptoms." Jessica flinched at the memory of that horrific drug-induced nightmare. "I don't know if I want to try more medication," she said hesitantly. "I understand your hesitation," Dr. Chen said gently, "but I believe a low dose of a different medication, combined with intensive therapy, could really help. We'll monitor you closely, I promise." Jessica glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Jessica said softly. "I'll try." "Good," Dr. Chen smiled. "Now, about the therapy. I think we need to directly address these nightmares. Not just talk about them, but confront them head on." Jessica felt her heart rate quicken. What do you mean? Dr. Chen's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination. I want to try something called imagery rehearsal therapy. Essentially, we'll work on reimagining and rewriting your nightmare scenario while you're awake. The goal is to give you more control when you encounter it in your dreams. Like lucid dreaming? Jessica asked, remembering her brief moment of control in an earlier dream. Similar, yes. Dr. Chen nodded, but this is more about changing the narrative of the dream itself. We'll practice visualizing a different, less frightening outcome to your car crash scenario. Emma squeezed Jessica's hand. That sounds promising, doesn't it, Jess? Jessica nodded slowly, hope blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. Yeah, it does, but how do we do it? Dr. Chen smiled. We'll start right now if you're up for it. Close your eyes, Jessica. I want you to visualize that mountain road. Jessica hesitated, fear coiling in her stomach. But she felt Emma's hand in hers, heard Dr. Chen's calm, steady voice. Slowly, she closed her eyes. I see it, she whispered, the familiar curves of the road appearing in her mind's eye. Good, Dr. Chen's voice came from far away. Now you're in the car, but this time you're in control. The car responds perfectly to your touch. The road is clear. The weather is beautiful. Can you see it? Jessica furrowed her brow, concentrating. Gradually, the nightmarish elements of her dream began to fade. The twisting trees straightened. The sickly green sky turned a brilliant blue. She felt her hands on the wheel, steady and sure. I can see it, she said, her voice stronger. I'm driving. It's okay. Excellent, Dr. Chen encouraged. Now I want you to drive to the end of that road. See yourself reaching your destination safely. Can you do that? Jessica took a deep breath, imagining the car moving smoothly along the road. In her mind, she rounded the final bend, expecting disaster, but instead she saw a beautiful vista spread out before her. Mountains, forests, a serene lake in the distance. I made it, Jessica breathed, opening her eyes. She was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. I actually made it to the end. Dr. Chen beamed. That's wonderful, Jessica. This is just the beginning, but it's a powerful start. I want you to practice this visualization every day. The more you can reimagine this scenario with a positive outcome, the more likely you are to carry that into your dreams. Jessica nodded eagerly, feeling a spark of determination. I can do that. What else? We'll continue with our sessions, working through any underlying anxieties or stressors that might be contributing to these nightmares, Dr. Chen explained. And I have one more suggestion, though it might sound a bit unconventional. Jessica and Emma exchanged glances. What is it? Jessica asked. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. I think you need to confront this fear in the real world, Jessica. I want you to take a drive on a mountain road. The room fell silent. Jessica felt her heart pounding in her chest, fear and adrenaline coursing through her veins. You want me to drive? On a real mountain road? Dr. Chen nodded. I know it sounds frightening, but facing our fears in a controlled, safe environment can be incredibly powerful. We'd plan it carefully, of course. Choose a safe road, go during daylight hours. You wouldn't be alone. I'll go with her, Emma said immediately, squeezing Jessica's hand. Every step of the way. Jessica's mind raced. The thought of getting behind the wheel, of driving on a road like the one in her nightmares, terrified her. But a small part of her recognized the potential power in it. To face her fear head-on, to prove to herself that she could do it. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Dr. Chen smiled warmly. I'm proud of you, Jessica. This is a big step. We'll plan it for a couple of weeks from now, give you time to work with the visualization techniques and get used to the new medication. As they left Dr. Chen's office, Jessica felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. Emma chatted animatedly beside her, already making plans for their road trip. We'll make a day of it, Jess, she was saying. Pack a picnic, find a nice spot with a view. It'll be like an adventure. Jessica managed a small smile. An adventure, she repeated. The word tasted foreign on her tongue, so far removed from the terror that had consumed her life these past weeks. That night, as Jessica prepared for bed, she felt a familiar fear creeping in. But this time, she was armed with new tools, new hope. She settled into bed, Emma once again keeping vigil in the chair beside her. "Remember," Emma said softly, "I'm right here. And you're in control, Jess." "It's your dream," Jessica nodded, closing her eyes. As she drifted off, she focused on the visualization Dr. Chen had taught her. The safe car, the beautiful day, the road that led to a breathtaking view instead of disaster. The mountain road materialized around her, as vivid as ever. But this time, Jessica didn't feel helpless. She gripped the wheel, took a deep breath, and began to drive. "It's my dream," she said aloud, her voice steady, "and I choose how it ends." As she drove, the nightmare elements tried to creep in, the twisting trees, the looming truck in her rearview mirror. But Jessica focused on her breathing, on the feeling of control. She pictured Emma beside her, Dr. Chen's voice in her ear. Slowly, the terrifying elements began to fade. When Jessica woke the next morning, she felt different. The nightmare hadn't completely disappeared, but she'd faced it, controlled it, even if just a little. "How was it?" Emma asked, stifling a yawn. Jessica considered for a moment. "It was better," she said finally. "Not perfect, but better. I think this might actually work." As they began to plan for the day ahead, Jessica felt a newfound determination. The road ahead would be challenging, she knew. But for the first time in weeks, she felt ready to face it. One day at a time, one dream at a time, she would reclaim her life from these nightmares. And in 2 weeks, she would face her ultimate test, the real mountain road. But with Emma by her side, and her new tools at her disposal, Jessica allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn this nightmare into an adventure after all. The early morning sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Jessica stood in the parking lot of her dorm, keys clutched tightly in her hand, staring at her car as if it might suddenly come to life and attack her. "You ready for this?" Emma's voice came from behind her, gentle but encouraging. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to quell the panic rising in her chest. "As ready as I'll ever be, I guess." The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and constant practice with Dr. Chen's visualization techniques. Jessica had made progress, but the thought of actually driving on a mountain road still filled her with dread. Emma placed a reassuring hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Remember, I'm with you every step of the way. We can turn back anytime you want." Jessica nodded, taking another deep breath. "No, we're doing this. I need to do this." With trembling hands, she unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar smell of leather and her lavender air freshener washed over her, simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Emma got in the passenger side, shooting Jessica an encouraging smile. "Okay," Jessica muttered to herself, gripping the steering wheel. "It's just a car, just a road. You can do this." She turned the key and the engine roared to life. Jessica flinched at the sound, memories of her nightmares flashing through her mind. But she pushed them aside, focusing on her breathing like Dr. Chen had taught her. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Emma chatted lightly about their plans for the day, clearly trying to distract Jessica from her fears. "I packed us a great picnic," she was saying, "and I found this amazing lookout point we can stop at. The views are supposed to be incredible." Jessica managed a small smile, grateful for her friend's efforts. The first part of the drive was familiar, city streets giving way to suburbs, then to more rural areas. But as they approached the foothills, Jessica felt her anxiety spike. "We're getting close," she said, her voice tight. "The turnoff for the mountain road should be coming up soon." Emma nodded, her voice calm and steady. "You're doing great, Jess. Remember, We can take breaks whenever you need to. No pressure. The sign for the mountain road loomed ahead. Jessica's hands tightened on the wheel, her knuckles turning white. As they made the turn, the road began to wind upwards, trees closing in on either side. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. It was so similar to her nightmares, the twisting road, the looming trees. For a moment she felt paralyzed by fear. "Jess?" Emma's voice cut through the panic. "You okay? Do you need to pull over?" Jessica shook her head, forcing herself to focus. "No, I'm okay, just give me a minute." She pulled the car to the side of the road, closing her eyes and taking several deep breaths. In her mind, she pictured the visualization Dr. Chen had taught her. The safe car, the beautiful day, the road leading to a breathtaking view. "You've got this," she whispered to herself. "It's just a road. You're in control." After a few moments, Jessica opened her eyes, feeling calmer. She looked over at Emma, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Ready to keep going?" Emma asked. Jessica nodded, pulling back onto the road. As they continued their ascent, she found herself relaxing slightly. The road was challenging, with its sharp turns and steep inclines, but it wasn't the nightmare scenario she had feared. They drove in silence for a while, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on asphalt. Jessica's confidence grew with each successfully navigated turn. Then, as they rounded a particularly sharp bend, a deer darted out onto the road. Jessica's heart leapt into her throat, her body reacting before her mind could process what was happening. She swerved instinctively, just like in her dreams. "Jess!" Emma cried out, grabbing the dashboard. For a terrifying moment, Jessica was sure they were going to crash. She could see it all playing out, just like in her nightmares, the car spinning out of control, plummeting off the cliff. But then something different happened. Instead of losing control, Jessica felt a sudden clarity. Time seemed to slow down. She remembered Dr. Chen's words. "You're in control, Jessica. Even in the most frightening moments, you have the power to choose your actions." With a steady hand, Jessica corrected the wheel, bringing the car smoothly back into their lane. The deer bounded off into the forest, unharmed. They were safe. Jessica let out a shaky breath, pulling the car over to the side of the road. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the realization of what she had just done. "Oh my God, Jess," Emma breathed, her face pale. You were amazing. Are you okay?" Jessica turned to her friend, a disbelieving laugh bubbling up from her chest. "I'm okay. I'm better than okay. Emma, did you see that? I didn't crash, I didn't freeze, I handled it." Emma's face broke into a wide grin. "You absolutely did. You're a rock star, Jess." The two friends sat there for a moment, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. Jessica had faced her worst fear, a real-life version of her recurring nightmare, and she had conquered it. "I think," Jessica said slowly, "I'm ready to keep going, all the way to the top." Emma squeezed her hand. "Lead the way, Captain." As they continued their ascent, Jessica felt a newfound confidence behind the wheel. The road was still challenging, but it no longer felt like a threat. Instead, it felt like an adventure. They reached the lookout point Emma had mentioned, pulling into a small parking area. As they got out of the car, Jessica took in the breathtaking view spread out before them. Miles of forested mountains, a crystal-clear lake nestled in the valley below, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. "Wow," Jessica breathed, walking to the edge of the lookout. "It's beautiful." Emma came to stand beside her, bumping her shoulder playfully. "See? I told you the view would be worth it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, soaking in the peaceful scene. Jessica felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over her. She had done it. She had faced her fear and come out the other side. "You know," Jessica said finally, turning to Emma with a smile, "I think I'm ready for that picnic now. I'm starving." As they sat on a blanket, enjoying the food Emma had packed and chatting about everything and nothing, Jessica felt lighter than she had in weeks. The nightmares that had plagued her seemed distant now, less powerful in the face of what she had accomplished. "Hey, Em," Jessica said, her voice soft. "Thank you. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Emma smiled, reaching out to squeeze Jessica's hand. "That's what friends are for. But Jess, you're the real hero here. You faced your fears head on. I'm so proud of you." Jessica felt tears prick at her eyes, but for once they were tears of joy and relief rather than fear and frustration. "I did, didn't I? I actually did it." As the afternoon wore on, Jessica found herself dreading the drive back less and less. When it was time to leave, she got behind the wheel with only a slight flutter of nervousness in her stomach. The drive down the mountain was almost enjoyable. Jessica found herself appreciating the beauty of the road, the skill required to navigate its twists and turns. It was challenging, yes, but no longer terrifying. As they pulled back into the dorm parking lot, the sun setting behind them, Jessica felt a sense of closure. She had come full circle, facing her nightmares both in her dreams and in reality. "So," Emma said as they got out of the car, "same time next week?" Jessica laughed, a full, genuine laugh that felt foreign after weeks of fear and stress. "You know what? Maybe. I think I might actually enjoy a drive like that again." As they walked back to their dorm, Jessica felt a profound shift within herself. The nightmares might not be gone completely, she knew. There would still be challenges ahead, therapy to continue, fears to face. But she had proven to herself that she was stronger than her fears. She had taken control of her story, both in her dreams and in her waking life. For the first time in weeks, Jessica looked forward to sleep, curious to see how her dreams might have changed. As she drifted off that night, the mountain road appeared in her mind. But this time it wasn't a source of terror. Instead, it was an invitation to an adventure, a challenge to be met and overcome. And Jessica was ready to face it, one dream at a time. The weeks following Jessica's triumphant mountain drive had been a whirlwind of progress. Her sessions with Dr. Chen had become more about managing everyday stress than battling nightmares. She'd even started enjoying driving again, taking weekend trips with Emma to explore nearby towns and scenic routes. But as Jessica sat in Dr. Chen's office for what was meant to be one of her final sessions, she couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. "You've made remarkable progress, Jessica," Dr. Chen was saying, her smile warm and encouraging. "How have you been sleeping?" Jessica hesitated, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. "Mostly good," she said slowly. "But..." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her brow furrowing. "But?" "I had a dream last night," Jessica admitted. It wasn't like the others. It felt different. More real somehow." Dr. Chen nodded, her pen poised over her notepad. "Can you tell me about it?" Jessica closed her eyes, the vivid images from her dream flooding back. "I was driving on the mountain road again, but this time I wasn't afraid. I felt confident, in control." "That sounds like progress," Dr. Chen encouraged. Jessica shook her head. "At first, yes, but then something changed. The road started to look familiar, but not from my nightmares. It was the actual road we drove on, the one with Emma, and then..." She trailed off, her throat tightening. "It's okay, Jessica," Dr. Chen said gently. "Take your time." Jessica took a deep breath. "I saw myself, another me standing in the middle of the road. She looked wrong, twisted, like all the ways I died in my dreams combined into one horrible version of myself. And she said this was my last chance, that it was time to face the truth." Dr. Chen's face remained neutral, but Jessica could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. "And how did that make you feel?" "Terrified," Jessica whispered. "But also determined." Like I knew this was it, the final confrontation. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. Jessica, I think you've reached a critical point in your recovery. This dream seems to be your subconscious telling you it's time to fully confront whatever is at the root of these nightmares. Jessica nodded, a mix of fear and determination swirling in her gut. So what do I do? Dr. Chen's eyes met hers, intense and serious. I think you need to go back to that mountain road. Alone this time. Jessica felt her heart skip a beat. Alone? But I know it's scary, Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. But you've proven you can handle it. You're not the same person you were when these nightmares started. You're stronger now, more in control. Jessica bit her lip, considering. The thought of driving that road alone terrified her. But a part of her knew Dr. Chen was right. This was something she needed to face on her own. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. A perfect day for a drive. Jessica stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, staring at her car. Emma stood beside her, worry etched on her face. Are you sure about this, Jess? Emma asked for what felt like the 100th time. I can come with you, or we could wait, do this another day. Jessica shook her head, forcing a smile. I'm sure. I need to do this, Em. For myself. Emma pulled her into a tight hug. Okay, but you call me the second you get to the lookout point, got it? And if anything feels off, you turn around immediately. Jessica nodded, hugging her friend back fiercely. I promise. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Jessica felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened today, she knew it would be a turning point. One way or another, this would end. The drive to the mountain road was uneventful, the familiar scenery passing by in a blur. But as Jessica made the turn onto the winding road that had haunted her dreams for so long, she felt a shift in the air. Everything seemed more vivid, more real somehow. It's just a road, she muttered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. You've done this before. You can do it again. She navigated the twists and turns with growing confidence, remembering the techniques Dr. Chen had taught her. Breathe. Stay present. You're in control. As she rounded a particularly sharp bend, Jessica gasped. There, in the middle of the road, stood a figure. Her heart pounding, she slowed the car to a stop. It was her. Another Jessica, just like in her dream. But this version of herself was whole, unmarred by the gruesome deaths of her nightmares. She stood there, a sad smile on her face, beckoning Jessica forward. With shaking hands, Jessica put the car in park and got out. The air was preternaturally still, no sound but her own ragged breathing. Who are you? Jessica called out, her voice echoing strangely in the quiet. What do you want? The other Jessica's smile widened. You know who I am. I'm you, the you that remembers. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Remembers what? The truth, her doppelganger said simply. The truth you've been running from all this time. And suddenly, like a dam breaking, memories flooded Jessica's mind. Not nightmares, but reality. The mountain road, dark and slick with rain. The deer, appearing out of nowhere. The sickening lurch as her car went over the edge. Jessica stumbled, falling to her knees on the asphalt. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. Her other self knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's time to stop running, Jessica. Time to accept what happened. Tears streamed down Jessica's face as the full weight of the truth crashed over her. The nightmares hadn't been premonitions. They'd been memories, fractured, distorted by her mind's desperate attempt to protect her from the truth. I died, Jessica choked out. That night, on this road. I actually died. Her doppelganger nodded, her eyes full of compassion. Yes, but you also lived. You survived, Jessica. Against all odds, you survived. As if triggered by these words, more memories surfaced. The hospital, the long, painful recovery, the therapist trying to help her process her trauma, and her mind's stubborn refusal to accept what had happened. Why? Jessica sobbed. Why couldn't I remember? Because sometimes the truth is too painful, her other self said gently. Your mind created these nightmares, these repeated deaths, as a way to process what happened without fully accepting it. But you're stronger now. You're ready to face it. Jessica looked up, meeting her own eyes in this strange mirror of herself. What happens now? Her doppelganger smiled, beginning to fade like mist in the morning sun. Now you live, Jessica. You really live. As the apparition disappeared completely, Jessica found herself alone on the mountain road. But she didn't feel alone. She felt whole. For the first time in what she now realized had been months, she felt like herself. With shaky legs, she stood, walking back to her car. As she slid into the driver's seat, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were clear, present, alive. Jessica started the engine, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was still winding, still challenging, but it no longer held the power to terrify her. She had faced her greatest fear, her deepest trauma, and she had survived. Again. As she drove towards the lookout point, Jessica felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The nightmares that had plagued her weren't gone, she knew. They were part of her now, a reminder of what she had endured, what she had overcome. At the lookout, Jessica parked and got out, walking to the edge to take in the breathtaking view. She pulled out her phone, dialing Emma's number. Jess? Emma's worried voice came through. Are you okay? Did you make it? Jessica smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. But these were tears of relief, of release. I'm okay, Em, she said, her voice strong and sure. I'm better than okay. I'm alive. As she stood there, looking out over the vast expanse of mountains and sky, Jessica felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The road that had been the source of so much fear and pain had also been the key to her healing. She had died on this mountain, but more importantly, she had lived. And now finally she was ready to embrace that life fully, without fear, without reservations. Jessica took one last look at the view, at the road winding back down the mountain. Then she turned back to her car, ready to drive home, ready to truly wake up from the nightmare and start living again. As she pulled away from the lookout, Jessica smiled to herself. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now she was ready to face whatever twists and turns lay ahead, wide awake and fully alive.